G'day, Bill. Welcome to Landscape Photography World. Thanks very much for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Grant. Lovely to speak. Lovely to, bump into you after all this time. We've kind of conversed a bit on the internet, I think, over the last couple of years.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah, well, as I said, thanks very much. It's great to get you on the show. I love your work in particular, both in photography and also some of your other work, which we might talk a little bit about as well as we go. So, before we go too much further, I'll let you introduce yourself and explain who is Bill Ward and why is he a landscape photographer.
Oh my God. Good luck, everyone. Yeah, I'm Bill. I'm a photographer and I'm an actor, and I do both and have done both. I've been an actor since 2000.
Mhm.
So for just over 25 years now, 26 years, and I've been a professional photographer since 2010. So 16 years.
Right.
And I often get asked, so which is the main thing you do? And what I generally say is I do both full time. So I chuck everything at both of them. And when I'm acting, as I am now, I'm touring a play at the moment. We're touring the Shawshank Redemption, which is a
Okay.
beautiful, uplifting, quite dark in places, but a beautiful, uplifting piece of work. We're touring it around the UK and Ireland. We're halfway through a tour. We've been touring since last August, and we're going through till June.
Mhm.
And while I'm doing that during the daytime, I'll be doing a little bit of photography along the way. So I was out with my camera yesterday, and what I tend to do when I do tours like this is I'll photograph what I bump into, either on my way to work. I walk to work. Always try and find a way of walking to work, and I'll carry a camera with me, and I'll photograph either what I bump into or what's around really. And then the other thing that I do when I do a job like this is because we're going to 35 theatres around the UK and Ireland, and I've got a project on theatres. So I take photographs of every building that I work in, and I've been doing that for 16 years. So, and I did a book about that actually during the pandemic when in the UK here, it looked like an awful lot of theatres were closing and may never open again. And so I did a book then for the Theatres Trust, which is the charity here in the UK that looks after theatres and quietly gives them advice and gives them money to help stop them going under, essentially.
Yeah.
So I've got an ongoing theatre project that I do on my way around, and I've been doing quite a bit on that this week because we're in a very beautiful Victorian theatre here in Eastbourne. So plenty on that front too.
And I guess just as an aside, before we get into the photography, how are things going in the theatre business in the UK since the pandemic? Because the same sort of thing happened here, and there's some places where it was usually, unfortunately, the smaller struggling ones that tended to happen to. But there's some here that have closed. Some of the bigger ones have been able to weather the storm. But I'm interested in how that is over in the UK.
Yeah, that's a good question. Much better now is would be the answer, Grant. Thank you. It during the pandemic, it was really difficult for theatres because in the UK, and this isn't a political point, it's just a factual point. Is the way theatres are funded used to be quite a lot on local grants from councils
Oh,
and the Arts Council here, which is the kind of the government funding body. And over the last 10 or 15 years, the amount of money that they've been able to give to theatres to stay afloat has decreased. And so, what that has meant is that theatres have had to survive more and more and more on either getting private donations or on selling tickets. And what that means is that in a pandemic, if you cut off the ticket supply, which you do when you shut a theatre and cut off the audience, you're essentially cutting off 95% of its funding.
yeah.
And so that was the problem in the pandemic was no audiences mean no funding for the theatres. And as you say, in our country too, a lot of theatres went under during the pandemic, and theatre companies in particular, who just couldn't, it didn't have the money to survive. And then coming out of the pandemic, what that also meant was that producers, to make theatre, it was a very risky business,
Yeah.
because if the money that you were going to make is predicated on audiences coming, A, what happens should the pandemic reappear, but B, people had kind of got out of the habit of going to the theatre during the pandemic. And so it took a while for those audiences to rebuild. And the West End here in London bounced back first, I would say, because it had quite a high influx of tourists still, which was useful. And then sort of regional theatre has started to bounce back a little bit. And so now we're 4 years on, 5 years on from the end of the pandemic, or coming out of the pandemic. It's just starting to get back to where it was. So it's been a long old journey. And I know a lot of theatre companies who've gone under. But in terms of getting people back into the theatre, that is happening more and more. But what is interesting, actually, is that the kinds of things they're going to see are different. And particularly with what's going on in the wider world, people want cheering up at the moment.
Oh,
so they're going to, so they're going to see a lot of musicals, a lot of comedies, those kinds of things. Yeah. But straight plays, hard-hitting plays that really make you think and are quite dramatic and quite sort of heavy, have not been doing so well. So you don't see a lot of that kind of stuff going around. And if a play has got a large number of people in, those are rare actors, those are rarer and rarer and rarer because they're more expensive to make, and there's no guarantee that an audience is going to come and see it. So it's much better than it was, and it's definitely on the up and coming out. And there was a bit of a worry here that theatre culture was really going to struggle and might disappear and might be sort of damaged forever, but it does seem to be bouncing back a little bit.
Well, it's good to hear. Good to hear. Let's talk about the photography now. Why did you start photography in 2010? What made you pick up a camera and point it at the landscape or the sea or whatever it was that took your fancy?
Yeah.
What is it that got you started?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I'd always had a camera. Mm-hmm. So my parents gave me a Kodak Instamatic when I was 7, and I just I took a lot of pictures, particularly when we were on holiday, actually. But also when we went somewhere, and I'm from the northeast of England, so from Newcastle-upon-Tyne, which is about 10 or 15 miles away from the North Sea. Yep. So we used to go to the North Sea a lot, and there's a stretch of coastline in the UK here, which is in Northumberland, I was born just at the bottom end of that. Okay. And that whole stretch of coastline is very beautiful. It's big, white, you'll understand this a lot given where you guys are, but big, white, sandy beaches, and very unspoilt, actually, still not a lot of development. And that really hasn't changed much during my lifetime. So I spent a lot of time when I was a kid walking up and down those beaches with my family with a camera. And when we weren't doing that, going on holiday, we'd be going to Cornwall, so the far west and southwestern tip of the UK, which is similarly wild, big sandy beaches. So I kind of grew up with that kind of stuff in my blood. And the other thing that I would do a lot of so I'd hang out a lot near water. And I'd get in it quite a lot. So I've been a surfer for 30 years. I've done a lot of bodyboarding in my time, a lot of canoeing, a lot of sailing, all of these kinds of things. So I like getting in the water. So in that kind of a way, being near water or being next to water or being by water with a camera has always been a thing for me ever since I was sort of very young. And then I went traveling when I was about 28, 29, and I bought my first sort of proper SLR camera. I bought a Tikka MTL5B and I went traveling for a year. It's a brick of a camera, that. It's indestructible. In fact, I had to get it repaired once on my travels, and I found a guy who could do it. He was a Burmese monk. Okay. Who could fix it. And it was amazing. And it was because the insides of it, he was brilliant, this guy, with manual cameras. And there was just everything on it was manual. So if something goes wrong on those kinds of cameras, I can't fix them, but if you know what you're doing, they're relatively easy to fix. Whereas with the sort of all of the bells and the whistles, and the fully automatic, everything,
an electronic.
You're in real trouble. So I took a camera traveling with me, which was brilliant. And I took a lot of the kinds of things that I don't usually do, actually, which was used to hang. I went traveling on my own, and but you always hang out with other people on the way, or you'll hang out with people for 2 or 3 weeks, and then you'll both move on to different destinations. But I would hang out in markets quite a lot, and A, because that's where all human life is, but B, sort of photographically really interesting, strong colours, but you also get a sense of a culture from those places.
Oh,
And
definitely.
so yeah, so I did a lot of traveling, and I know you're off to Borneo, I think it is,
Yeah,
isn't it?
that's right.
In the near
In
future, yeah, I traveled quite a bit through Indonesia.
Mm.
So and so I went to Sulawesi and all of the eastern islands, and I had the most amazing time with my camera, Seram and Maluku, and I did so. I spent a lot of time. So in terms of 10,000 hours of practice, I did it on that trip. And I always had a camera after that I would use and that I would sort of wander around with. And a specific event happened for me, which was that I was doing a pilot for a TV show out in Canada. It was a kind of cop drama, it was the idea was that it went to series on Canadian television. We were filming it out in Montreal, and but with pilots, you never know if it's going to go to series or not. So you just do a pilot and then cross your fingers, and if it comes back, it comes back, and if it doesn't, you move on. But with this one, the difference was that if it was going to film, it was going to be out in Montreal, and I would have been contracted for 7 years to do it.
Oh, wow.
And so I had a period after the pilot had been made, but before the decision had been taken whether to make it into a series, that I had sort of time that I couldn't do any other acting with. So I came back. I was contracted, pretty much contracted, not to work for anyone else in case it went to
In case
series.
it went. Yeah.
Yeah. So I came back to the UK. That would be in sort of November 2009.
Right.
And I had about 3 or 4 months that I couldn't do any other acting work, and I kind of thought, well, what am I going to do with this time? So I thought, well, what else do I do a lot of? And I was still taking a lot of pictures at the time with a film camera, and I kind of thought, well, why don't I buy my first kind of proper DSLR and a tripod and do a photography project? I've got the time. Why don't I do that? So that's what I did. So I bought myself my first sort of proper DSLR, which was a Pentax K20.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And full disclosure, I am an ambassador for Pentax, and the reason is that I use Pentax cameras is in a previous life before I was an actor and a photographer. I worked for advertising agencies, and one of the advertising, I was an account director and a strategic planner, and one of the advertising agencies I worked for was Saatchi and Saatchi, and they did Pentax's advertising, and so we would get gear at cost. So I got film cameras at cost from Pentax, and I've always really liked them, and they've always done what I would like them to do, and very reliable, well made. So I kind of stuck with them, and so that's why I got a Pentax digital SLR, and I also bought my first tripod. I'd never owned a tripod up until that point.
Okay.
And then I kind of thought, well, what am I going to do with this time? So I took both of those things, which were both sort of brand new, shiny, new, exciting things, and I decided to do a project on the coast because that's the bit that I understood the best, and specifically the coast of Eastern England, because I'm from Newcastle-upon-Tyne, but at the time I was living in London. And so I had access to pretty much all of the eastern coast of England. And I kind of thought, well, why don't I do a project on that? And it was over winter. And with global warming, one would expect it to be warm and wet. But actually, that winter was the coldest winter. It was a throwback. And it was the coldest winter for 28, 29 years. And so I ended up with all sorts of really unusual stuff because I was essentially photographing winter on the beach in blizzards. And that was quite exciting and quite interesting. And I got some really unusual photographs. And then from that, I kind of thought, well, that was a slightly, because I'd never used a tripod before. And so I was using longer shutter speeds for the first time. And that was just like opening a door into a brand new world. It was so exciting. And I loved the kind of thing that I was getting. And then one of the next sort of jobs I did after that was at a theatre company a theatre in Manchester called the Royal Exchange, beautiful theatre I'd always wanted to work at. And they had an art shop in the theatre. And I noticed that they were responsible for some exhibitions in the theatre. And I kind of said, well, I've got this project that I've been doing over the last sort of 4 or 5 months. Would you be interested in showing it? And they said, well, you better show us it first and then we'll choose. Yeah, exactly. So I sort of printed up 30 or so images from the project, which was exciting in itself because
Definitely, yeah.
choosing is part of the editing process, isn't it? Where you kind of go, so I've got all of these and I had thousands and it was, but getting it down to 30 was I really enjoyed that process. Can you kind of go, what is it about these pictures that speak to me of this project, this time, this place, this feeling? And so that was a really useful exercise. And they decided to take it on. And so I did my first exhibition with them. And then ever since then, I've run both photography and acting side by side. And so that's kind of where it came from and why it kind of works concurrently, because during that job, which I was doing, I was doing an Ibsen, a Norwegian playwright, The Lady from the Sea.
Yep.
And once we'd got that show up and running, I had about 3 weeks where I was free in the afternoons. And so I did a photography project when I was in Manchester. I did it on the Manchester canals. And I'd actually done a television job back there a few years ago. So I knew the Manchester canals really well.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I tend to do is I do projects that are specific to what I bump into or where I am. And that kind of way of working evolved from that time. So not only did I do my first exhibition then, but I started a practice of taking my camera to wherever I'm doing an acting job and then running the two side by side from there.
Yeah, interesting. You've raised a few things that I want to dig into. One, you talked about the feeling of a place and time. And I know in some of our correspondence that we've had, you've talked about how photography is a meeting between you and a place at a particular time. And I'd like to just sort of get you to talk a little bit about how that sort of thinking came about. What was it about those sorts of three elements, the person, the place you were at, and the time you were there, how they sort of came together to sort of coalesce into that thinking?
Oh, that's such a good question. It's as ever with these things, a bit of an evolution for me. When I was doing a television job in Leeds in the north of England, quite a long running job. It was a soap for 3.5 years. And while I was doing that, it sort of became I was doing interviews and it became sort of a bit known that I was also a photographer. And
Right.
so I started getting asked to do talks at photography societies and camera clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, you kind of go, well, what is it that I do? What is it that I believe in? And so I thought quite long and hard about it for a couple of years. And I read all sorts of books. I've never been a big YouTuber, so I tend not to get my information from YouTube, although I'm aware loads of photographers do. And there's a huge,
That's where I learnt a lot of my photography.
Yes, it's a wonderful resource. Yeah. But for me, it was books. So I was reading pretty much anything that Joe Cornish, who's a brilliant, wonderful and of landscape photography here in the UK, pretty much anything he wrote, I read. David Ward, who is a contemporary of Joe Cornish, specialises in intimate landscape photographs, so close-up stuff essentially. And I read pretty much anything he wrote. And I also read a lot by Bruce Barnbaum. He wrote an extraordinary book called The Art of Photography. And that was really, out of all of them, that was the one that really had me thinking about not just what I do, but why I do it. And that was really useful because I started to sort of try and get to the root of what it was that I was up to. And for me, it's always been unashamedly emotional photography, unashamedly emotional. And it's unashamedly emotional because of the other thing that I do for a living. So I spend quite a lot of time in the company of a lot of other humans, very bright, intelligent, loud, vivacious,
And create.
creative humans, wonderful humans. But I can't live at that kind of sort of oscillation of energy all of the time. I'm sort of part introvert as well as part extrovert. And so for me, what I've learnt is over the years that photography is a kind of perfect yin yang to the acting world. And so I use photography to put back into me and to hang out with Mother Nature. And one of the things that was particularly interesting to me about the very first exhibition that I'd done at the Royal Exchange, which I was talking about earlier, was there was no people in it. No people at all.
Yep.
And I was really struck by that. And I had been struck that I was deliberately going to quiet places. And that wasn't something I'd thought about. It was simply something that I'd done. And then you kind of go, oh, well, that's really interesting. So what is going on here? And so for me, it's about it's about balancing the two out and spending time with Mother Nature. And I started to realize that was what was going on, that the quiet was as important as the place, and the quality of time was as important with the place. So I'm not a kind of, and there's no, one of the things I love about photography is the broad churchness of it. You can be anything you would like to be. You can make any kinds of pictures that you would like to make. And I would just encourage anyone who's listening to this to make whatever pictures that occur to them and which give them joy. That's my whole thing, is do whatever gives you joy. And what I found was giving me joy was being in very quiet places without anyone else there, spending time with Mother Nature. And then I started, because I was starting to give talks at camera clubs, I was starting to think, well, what is it that I do? And Bruce Barnbaum's book was really hugely helpful in that respect. He just asked a lot of questions and kind of goes, just have a think about what it is that you're doing. And I started to try and distill it down. And where I ended up is where it would still be true of my photography now. And where I sort of distilled it down to was what I'm trying to get at in my photography is that it's about specifically how it felt to spend this particular time with this particular place. And there's three thoughts in there. There's feeling, which is the first thing that comes with photography for me. Everything else is secondary to that. It's wholly and unashamedly emotional for me, purely emotional feeling. And then specifically how I felt to spend this particular time. So it's feeling, and then it's time, and then it's place. And for me, it's about the quality of the time that you spend in a place. And for me, what I tend to find is the quieter a place is, the higher the quality of the time that I can spend in a place. What is interesting, incidentally, is that in a city centre, and because of the other thing that I do for a living, I do find myself in city centres quite a lot.
Sure.
You can almost, if you're in the moment and sort of spending time with a place, you can block out all of the other noise and just concentrate on something. And all photographers, I'm sure, will recognize that feeling of just locking on to something, and then everything else just disappears. Time
It's
disappears.
like you're in your own little bubble.
That's it.
Even though there's throngs of people around you. Yeah.
That's it. So even in a busy place, you can sort of almost generate those conditions of quiet based on the quality of the connection that you have with a place. But for me, that's kind of how it evolved. It's about feeling, it's about time, and then it's about place. And if I could only have two of those, it would be feeling and time, because I think you can make photographs anywhere.
Sure.
And if you look hard enough, and I talk about this a lot, for me, photography is noticing. And if you give yourself enough time to notice, then you'll always come up with something. I run workshops, sort of some at the sea, some at the coast, some in towns. And what I often do is in towns, if people are struggling to find something, you kind of go, right, you've got 30 yards from this bollard to that window. Find a picture.
Nice.
and you've got half an hour, and everyone always does. I've never ever come across anyone who hasn't been able to do that,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting. And then you kind of go, so it's just about the quality of our attention and giving yourself permission and allowing yourself to notice stuff, and then after that, everything else kind of clicks into place.
Fantastic. You talked a little bit also about growing up, going to the beach, going to the seaside, and where you lived obviously shaped some of those visual instincts that you've talked about as well. I'm interested though, that challenging of yourself, do you find that the seascape sort of genre feels limiting at all, or does it still challenge you time after time and surprise you? Does it actually surprise you sometimes?
Yes, still. And that's because everywhere you go, it's always different. And tide has a lot to do with that. So there's been, I was up against, not against, with, I was with some of the most extraordinary weather that I've seen in Cornwall recently. And you kind of go, goodness me, I've never seen it look like this. I've been coming here 50 years and I've never seen it look like this. So tide has something to do with it. Weather conditions have something to do with it. And then also, I always think how you're feeling. And it's that Freeman Patterson quote, isn't it? The camera looks both ways. And I really think that is true. And certainly in the acting business, we're doing this show, The Shawshank Redemption. We'll be doing it upwards of 200 times. And every night it's different because we're all humans and we bring something with us onto the stage, and it might be infinitesimally different to the previous day, but it is nevertheless specific and it's there. And so the performances will be slightly different. And I talk about this a lot. For me, photography is like acting, is about listening and responding. And I tend, and listening to Mother Nature and responding to her. And for me, Mother Nature is pretty much always doing something different. And if you're bringing something different in with you and Mother Nature is bringing in something different, you have a pretty good chance of making a different kind of a picture together. And I do tend to think of it, and you alluded to that a few minutes ago, I do tend to think of it in those terms. I tend to think of photography as a meeting place between you and wherever you happen to be. And I do think it's it's an ensemble creation. It's quite easy to think of photography as quite dictatorial, which is, I'm going to go here, I'm going to get that sunrise as it rises over that castle at 7:15, and then I'm going to leave. And then if I don't get it, I'm going to come back tomorrow, and I'm going to keep going.
Well, anyone that's done landscape photography knows that that's not true.
Yeah, exactly. And so Mother Nature is going to do what she wants to do. And
Absolutely.
my general thing,
what you get.
Yes, and see what you can make of it. And because it's an ensemble creation between you and wherever you happen to be. And part of the joy of photography for me is seeing what you can make of it. Some of my favorite days are low cloud, drizzly days when it doesn't appear there's a lot on, but there is always something on, whether it's little details. Then the question that you asked is really interesting because there's always something you haven't noticed. And so if you've got a drizzly day, and generally you go to a place where it's sunny and you've got a drizzly day, all of a sudden that takes away a lot of the options that you might have for sort of high contrasty sunny side photographs. And you kind of go, okay, well, what else is there here? And one of the things I talk a lot, it's a really good question to ask, two really useful questions to ask. What if I change something here? If I change the perspective, if I change lens, if I move 2 inches to my right, all of those kind of questions, but also what else? So keep asking yourself, what else haven't I noticed yet? What else is here that I haven't seen? And there is always something. There is always something. So one of the things I love about going back to a place that I've been before, and you mentioned it earlier, is the challenge of, well, what else is there here? What else? How can I make a new photograph? An original photograph here? And I do quite like trying to do that, whether you or not you achieve it or not is a whole new ball game. But I do like that as an objective. What can I make new here? What can I make here that I haven't imagined before or seen before? So that's something laudable, I think, to aim for. Whether you achieve it or not is completely another thing. But it's always a useful thing to aim for, I think. And yeah, so yeah, I hope that sort of vaguely answers the question.
No, absolutely it does. Thank you. The other thing that I'm interested in is how both of your disciplines, both acting and photography, putting a lot of yourself into both of those, how do you sort of balance the two, and how do you take things away from photography that play into your acting career, and how do you take things out of acting that might play into your photography career?
Really, yeah, really interesting. It just loads of great stuff in there. They do feed each other,
Mm.
and when I've done an awful lot of one without doing very much of the other, I miss the other one.
Yeah.
So during the pandemic, when acting essentially in the UK was abolished, the for a year and a half, 2 years, I did a lot of photography, and I did photography either in our garden or I did a project on some logs in the local park. I started doing projects on all sorts of things I've never noticed before. Blossom, for instance. I'm not really a flower photographer, but all of a sudden I became really excited by blossom and rebirth and all of those things. I became obsessed by trees losing their leaves and the shapes that they make as they reached up to the heavens. When that, I really missed acting. I really missed it, and I was really surprised by that. And when I've just only done acting for like a year and a half, I really miss photography because, like, as mentioned previously, for me, they kind of balance each other out. And I love this sort of extrovert world of the acting business. But in an acting company, I will usually be the quietest member. Occasionally I'm not, but generally I will be. I'll be the one sitting listening to everybody else's hilarious, and they are hilarious stories, but it's not me that's telling them ever. And so, in that kind of a way, I tend to find that a balance of the two is useful for me. In terms of specifics of what feeds each one, we mentioned this a couple of minutes ago, but listening and responding. There's a school of, funnily enough, I'm giving a talk at the photography show about this at the NEC in Birmingham in a couple of weeks' time here in the UK. There's a school of acting thought, which is called Meisner, but named after a guy called Sanford Meisner who originated it. And it's simply about going with what you're given. And it's about using outside stimulus to generate your own performance. And I use that a lot in photography. Occasionally I'll have an idea of something when I turn up, but generally I like just to turn up and see and improvise. And so, improvisation is taught in acting. There's another great acting teacher called Konstantin Stanislavski, upon which most Western acting teaching is based. He was a Russian turn of the century acting teacher, brilliant actor, brilliant director, brilliant theatre thinker. Spent a lot of time in the West in the middle of his career, and a lot of his sort of acting thoughts are still used to this day, and it's the main source of teaching for acting, certainly in the UK, a lot in the States. The whole method acting school came from Stanislavski in the States. So the Actors Studio in particular. But he would talk in terms of objectives, to take in an objective to a place. And a lot of photographers will do that. They'll take in an objective. But the point about an objective is it's useful only for as long as it's playable. And at the minute it becomes unplayable, then what else are you going to do? And so for me, that's when the improvisation takes over, which is where Meisner is just brilliant. And then it's listen and respond and just allow what is around you and what is on the outside to come in and see what you can make of it, because that's what acting is. Acting is all about listening and responding to whoever it is that is directly opposite you. That's what it is. And so that's really useful. And then going the other way from photography to acting, actually, and I haven't sort of thought about it in this way before, but I do think there is a calm that you get from photography that is really useful. There is a sense of mindfulness that you can bring with you, which is to do with quite a deep connection between you and wherever you happen to be. And that is a useful thing to bring into an acting space. That kind of energy, I think, where you can lock on to something and just be there with it. That's useful, I think. And so in that kind of way, they do both sort of feed each other, I think. And I certainly consciously use a lot of what I've learned in acting over the years in the photography world. There are another couple of humans, but one in particular, there's a guy called Philippe Gaulier, who is a clown. He's a French clown. And I studied under him for 3 in North London when he had a school in North London. He teaches out of Paris. But he ran a series of acting exercises called Le Jeu. So the games. And his whole thing is about complicity. It's about enjoying what you're doing and having fun and being childlike in your sort of how you, not childish, childlike, in how you relate to what is around you, your sense of wonder, essentially. And I use that a lot in photography, just in terms of it's a sense of playfulness as much as anything else. And I think that's really, really useful in the photographic world. It's quite easy to get bogged down in f-stops. And do you know what I mean? And,
the technology or the techniques precedence in a lot of people's minds as opposed to the creativity side of things. And I think a lot of people that haven't quite mastered their technique or are starting to experiment with new technique, they might have mastered long exposure, but now they're going to do ICM and combining that long exposure with moving the camera around, that takes a little bit of discipline, and you've got to then go back to that learning phase so that you can then come back to going, okay, well, now I'm going to be creative and play with it, as opposed to concentrating, as you say, on the f-stop or the aperture or whatever.
Yeah, that's it. And just trying to get that kind of stuff down, because we were talking about photography being an ensemble creation between you and wherever you happen to be, but that also includes your equipment and your camera, because that is part of the ensemble creation. And it's about having this, I think, in terms of energy quite a lot. And I think in terms of the flow of energy between Mother Nature and us humans. And the camera is part of that, because that's where that energy is ending up. It's ending up on the back of the center of the camera. So the more, it's one of the reasons I use cameras that I've got a camera. My main camera is Pentax K1 II, which I think is 2017, maybe 2018. I also have a K3 Mark III, which is 2021. But I like stuff that I know well. And there's been no bad camera, as far as I'm aware, made in the last 10 years, arguably. Camera manufacturers and
been some weird ones, but
yes,
in terms of being able to take a photo, most of them have been pretty good.
Pretty decent. And once you get above 20 megapixels or 15 or 16 megapixels, you're in business if you're blowing anything up to 4 foot by 3 foot. Yeah. So in terms of 50 megapixels is useful if you're punching in on stuff and if you're a pixel peeper and you're huge on detail, but for the vast majority of stuff. So I tend to use stuff that I've used for a while, partly because I see no reason why I wouldn't, because it's still making very beautiful pictures that please me, but I know them inside out. And so the gear doesn't get in the way of the photograph. And I think that's really important stuff. That it's just once it becomes a part of you, an extension of you and your mind and your hand, and you just know how to use it. So when you do have, as Mother Nature does occasionally do, chuck up something extraordinary, but only for a very few seconds, you are in a position to do something about it because you know your gear inside out.
Yeah. I like to ask how photographers define success in their photography. What is success in your photography to you?
Oh, what a tricky question that is.
Well,
I
it can be.
cannot. I'll be honest with you, Grant. I tend not to think in those kinds of terms.
Sure. Okay.
I tend not to be absolutist in that kind of way. I tend to work more on feelings. And for me, I have, even if I come back with no pictures, if I've had a delightful afternoon mucking about with a camera, doing all sorts of interesting stuff and trying all sorts of things that haven't worked, ideally it'd be nice to come away with a picture. But if I've had a good time,
Mm.
mucking about with a camera and trying all sorts of things, then that for me is a delight. And so I would think more in terms of delight and joy and less in terms of empirical
I
success.
love that. That's a fantastic response. For some people, it's money. Some people, it's awards.
Yeah.
Some people, it's just I've taken a nice photo.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I kind of, for me, it tends to be about the experience of it.
Mm.
And I think AI is interesting because for me, what AI is all about the end product, as I understand it, and as I see it, it's about what you end up making.
Sure.
Whereas for me, the important part of photography is not that. It's the making. It's the how you got there. And for me, because of the other thing that I do for a living, and we haven't touched on this yet, but I spend most of my professional life as an actor indoors. And I spend most of it indoors in a room with no windows.
Yeah.
And whether that's on a TV set or in a theatre rehearsal room or in a theatre. And occasionally rehearsal rooms have windows, not always. And so for me, the being outdoors and spending time with Mother Nature is integral to the whole point of my photography. It's why I do it, literally why I do it. So in that kind of a way, that's the most important thing for me. It's the being outdoors and the making. And it's almost less important to me what I make. The more important thing to me is the joy of making, the joy of trying to create something, and it's one of the reasons, I'm sure we'll go on and talk about this, but it's one of the reasons why I've always loved intentional camera movement is you're making something that is in addition to what was already there.
Yeah.
And you don't know what it's going to be until you make it. And so the level of surprise that you get in terms of origination and originality and all of those kinds of things, is colossal. And what I really like about it is that it's incremental. It's an addition to the universe. This thing that you make with you, between you and Mother Nature, didn't exist 5 minutes ago until you try and make it together. And I kind of like that because I sort of philosophically, I think that's really good stuff.
Yeah, totally. Let's dig a bit deeper on the ICM. What started that fascination with it? Was it that creative spark that really kicked it off, or was it something else?
Yeah, a bit of both, actually. I read an interview that Doug Chinnery, who's a brilliant creative photographer, creative artist, actually, and I read an interview that he'd given to On Landscape magazine, which is based here in the UK but reaches worldwide.
Yep.
And it was back in 2011. And he was talking about his photography, and he was sort of predominantly, I think, a long exposure photographer at the time, but he was doing a lot of experimenting with all sorts of different types of photography. And one of the things he was experimenting with was intentional camera movement. And in this interview, he showed a couple of ICM pictures, and they just immediately drew my eye. It was one of those things where you kind of go, "Oh, that is exciting." And I was also doing a lot of, this is about 2 years after I kind of started doing it professionally. And I'd been doing a lot of medium long exposures photography because of the project that I'd been doing about winter on the coast of Eastern England. A lot of that was long exposure photography. And so I kind of thought, and this was kind of like long exposure photography, only with a moving camera. And what I liked about it, and what I loved about long exposure photography, was that it was taking reality and then just tweaking it a little bit. So you kind of aggregated time. You took time, like 30 seconds or a minute or 4 minutes, and squished it into one frame. And so you have your starting point, but you also have a finishing point, which is very different from your starting point. And I really like that. And I noticed that immediately in ICM, where you kind of go, oh, look, it's not what he started with. This is a really unusual photograph. And so I found it sort of visually surprising. And so in that kind of a way, I started investigating it pretty much immediately. Then the next year, 2012, I started mucking about with ICM. Firstly, actually on a tripod and using that, and with seascapes. And then sort of particularly, I started with Seascape ICM around 2012, 2013. And then, but I've tried ICM. I do ICM projects, intentional camera movement projects, on pretty much anything I bump into, literally anything.
Yeah.
So I've got projects on flowers, houses, cars, cyclists, dogs, horses, dandelions, you name it. And so I will try it on pretty much anything, because I like how it depersonalizes stuff. And I like the difference between the start point and the finish point. And it reminds me a lot of being in the rehearsal room, where you're on a journey to an unknown destination, but the only way you get there is by taking a very deep breath and trying it. And I teach this stuff. And what I always say is start somewhere, start anywhere, but do start. Because it's by starting, you use the back of your camera as a sketch pad, essentially. You see the ideas developing on the back of your camera, and then you kind of go, well, where can I go with this? What is it giving me that I wasn't expecting? What does this look like? It's the whole Minor White thing of we photograph things for what they are, but also what else they are. And so for me, it was very much about that, sort of using the back of a camera, the LCD on the back of the camera, to go, right, well, what does that look like? What do I like about this? How can I sort of evolve this and take this idea further? So in that kind of a way, I love ICM because of the surprises that it gives you. And often it will come from places that you're least expecting it. So when I'm at the sea, and I do a lot of ocean ICM, when I'm at the sea, I will often point the camera inland, because it's the place that is less obvious, and it often gives you something that you're not expecting. I'll also obviously use the reflections of the water and the light on the water and all of those kind of things. But part of the ICM thing is that you don't know what you're going to get until you get it. And what I love about it as a sort of technique and as a sort of genre is that you're welcoming in Mother Nature and serendipity into the process. You're not pretending that it's all you, the great photographer. This is my vision. I'm going to make my picture of my vision. You're welcoming in serendipity and saying, come on, help me out here. Be part of this process. Let's see what we can make together. And so I love that kind of that sense of ensemble creation.
Yeah. I think that said, though, there is also, as you said, you've got to point your camera at the right sort of subject. You've also got to move the camera in the right way for that subject to work in ICM. It's, not much good if you say, look, standing in a copse of trees that are all very vertical, and then you're moving your camera sideways. Yes, you can do it. But to be honest, the image is just going to look like a blur of grey or brown.
Well, and that's the exciting thing.
That is the exciting thing, but it's still part of, you've got to do it in the right light, or you've got to move it in the right way to give you something that actually works for what you're trying to do. But yes, you can move it any way you like. I'm not suggesting, and as you said right at the beginning, people should make whatever photos they want, but some things work better than others visually.
And this is where it gets interesting. And because I think it's about personal taste. And I think one of the joys of ICM and I absolutely hear everything you're saying. And one of the things that I think is interesting about it is that until you try ICM, it's very difficult to know where on the kind of spectrum and the continuum from kind of realistic to abstract you're likely to be.
Yeah.
And for me, loads of photographers tend to be quite different and will be different minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, subject to subject. And I'll do some stuff that is wholly abstract and other stuff that is very close to being realistic. And you mentioned earlier about trees and moving across, and part of what I teach would be contours and contrast, and follow the contours of things exactly as you say, going up a tree, because that's where the contours and the contrast lies between the light and the shade, the dark and the light. Um, and that is a useful place to start. But as ever with these things, I love to subvert whatever principles may exist just to see what happens. And sometimes by going against the grain, you might not get something immediately obvious, but you might see the twitch of something that makes you go, oh, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
And then you just start a movement maybe that has a bit of vertical, but it also has a swoop in it. And you try all of these things. And for me, what I tend to find is that the ones that don't work for your personal taste, and this is only about personal taste,
Okay.
the ones that, yeah,
Well, that's what photography is in a lot of cases.
yes. There's no empirical right or wrong. That is the joy. And so what ICM, how it works for me is that by doing stuff that doesn't please you, it starts to open the door towards stuff that does, because that tells you something. And what I often say is, if you're getting something with ICM that doesn't please you, change it. Change something. And then it's a question of what is it that you're going to change? Is it the subject? Is it, exactly as you say, is it the movement? Or is it, if you are doing sort of horizontal movements in a place with vertical subjects like a forest, cutting down the size of the horizontal movement or the speed of the horizontal movement, just giving it a little twitch, as opposed to going across all of it.
Or changing the shutter speed as well.
Yes, exactly.
And that's the thing. There are endless possibilities in doing it.
That's it. And that's the joy of it. And that for me is why time, which is what we talked about a fair amount earlier, is such an important part of this process. Because if you've got time, you can go down the rabbit hole. And for me, ICM is all about rabbit holes. It's about investigating avenues of ideas that turn up on the back of a camera, and allowing yourself and giving yourself the opportunity to go down those routes. And it may be it's a dead end at the end, but you won't know until you go down it. And so that for me is the joy of it, because every now and again, right at the end of this very long, dark rabbit hole, is a little door to a really exciting place. And you won't know until you go down the rabbit hole.
No, I'm definitely going down that rabbit hole a number of ways, because I've even started doing intentional camera movement with my drones.
Have you? And very exciting. How are you getting on with that?
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Depends on what you point the camera at. Depends on the angle that you use, and depends on some. There's a whole raft of things. One of the interesting things is the limit that I've got. I've only got the DJI Mini 3, so its maximum shutter speed, regardless of whether or not you've got filters, and I use them extensively in that sort of work, is 2 seconds. So I cannot go further than 2 seconds with.
Yeah. Okay.
So
that's not bad though, is it? I mean,
get some quite interesting effects, and whether it's moving the drone vertically so that you've got this zoom in, zoom out sort of effect, or whether you're moving it horizontally, or even if you're looking straight down and spinning it around the vertical axis so that you're actually bringing twist into some of the images. And also playing around by actually swiveling the gimbal on the camera as well, so that the camera itself is on the drone. It might you can combine, if you've got enough thumbs, you can combine.
Yeah, brilliant.
And brilliant. So, I mean, as I say, some things work, some things don't. But it's just interesting going down that rabbit hole and exploring, and seeing what comes back. Because I mean, in particular, unless I can be bothered then flicking through and getting the drone to transmit an image back to the controller, I'm not going to see it until I actually take the card out of the drone and get it back onto the computer. So it's not even like I've got a back of the camera all the time to give me that immediate feedback. So sometimes it is, for me, ultimate experimentation, because it's, okay, bang out a bunch of different movements and different things with different subjects, and then come back into the studio and then work out, okay, well, that didn't work, that worked, that's not too bad, that's close, but if I do this, that'll give me some other result.
And which is fabulous, because that's like Freeman Patterson was doing ICM with film cameras in the sort of 80s, 70s, 80s, isn't it? And it's that, isn't it, where you're kind of going, I've no idea whether this is going to work or not, but it's worth giving, it's worth trying to see if it does. And with all of those things, it's only about the ones that work. The ones that don't work on the way there, that's absolutely fine, because they help you towards the ones that do. And it's only about the ones that do. Well, that's a fabulous idea. How exciting! That's great.
It has been a lot of fun, and trying to find subjects that really work. Particularly sort of top down. There's rock formations. Done a little bit with waterfalls that didn't quite work the way that I thought they might. So found a nice 100-meter waterfall that I could shift vertically, but only getting a couple of seconds doesn't get. But it does give you some interesting effect.
I can imagine. Yeah, brilliant idea.
Let's talk a little bit about the business side of things. You decided to start workshops. Why did you start, and how's it going from a business perspective, and how does that fit into your other work, your personal photography, and also the acting side of things in terms of time and effort? Because I know, having run workshops myself, the effort you've got to put in up front to work out, okay, where am I going? Where are we staying if it's multi-day? All those sorts of things come into play. And it's a lot of work before you actually get into the field with the client. How do you go about all of that?
I'm a massive researcher. So I kind of, I like to get ducks in a row, really. And a lot of workshops that I run will be coastal, because that's my happy place. And I know it from both the sea as a surfer, but also as a photographer from the land. And so I've always taken quite a keen interest in tides, wind direction, weather direction, radar of rain coming in, all of that stuff. All of that is quite big in my world, always has been. So in that kind of a way, so for instance, I've just ran a workshop for Light and Land here in the UK, down in the far west of Cornwall, during the wettest 2 months on record. And that was tricky, and it was huge fun trying to find pockets of places where, even if it was raining, we could still photograph because we were facing away from the wind. But also pockets of sunlight and pockets of light cloud and that comes from just looking at the radar and the radar predictions of where is the rain likely to be in the next hour, how can I dodge it? So I like all of that stuff, and the way that works is so I ran that workshop 2 weeks ago for Light and Land, and it was a 4-day workshop, 3.5-day workshop, but I was researching that from August, and we were in the far west of Cornwall, which is a part of Cornwall I know very well. I've been going there 50 years, but I've been down on separate visits on 4 or 5 occasions for a day, day and a half, 2 days, looking at states of tides on different beaches, looking at how different beaches react to different wind directions, and being there when it's raining to work out where, even if it's raining, we can still use a camera. And that's all part of your research, isn't it? It's exactly as you say. You may only use on a workshop, any given workshop, a quarter or a third of these locations, but you have to have all of the other ones in your back pocket.
You've got to have a plan B and C.
And C and D and E. And keep going down the alphabet, because in wintertime, it can just change on a sixpence. So that's exactly it. And I had all sorts of indoor locations. We used one of them, should we need to, but I'd sort of scoped about 6 or 7 that we could have used if it had been unremitting rain. And that can happen. It would be very, very unlikely if that happened. but you scope out all of the variables, and I like that. I like that part. I like that part of the job. That's the research. But in terms of what you're asking, what that means is that I've got a young family, and I've got another half who are all of whom I love very dearly, and I have another job as an actor which takes me away from home quite a lot. So if I'm doing all of that research, which is 5 or 6 days of research, 7 or 8 by the time we start the workshop, as a photographer, not as a teacher, as a photographer, those are days that I'm not photographing.
Yeah.
Those are days that I'm, as a business person, scoping the logistics of a tour. So, in a world in which I have, as a full-time actor and as a full-time photographer, I'm taking fewer pictures. Essentially, is definitely part of that. And so, what that means is when I have to work very hard to ring fence time for myself as a photographer
Yep.
to make sure that I'm still feeding the beast, if you like, making sure that I'm still taking the kinds of pictures that fill me up, and not just working on logistics of business plans and location for investigation. So yeah, it's a good question, that, and it's a balance, as ever with these things. It's a balance. And part of the acting business, because that's the other thing that I do, is quite capricious. It can change on a sixpence at very short notice. This job that I'm doing, touring the Shawshank Redemption, I got that it's a year's work, and I got that at 5 weeks' notice.
Yeah.
So
Right.
in that kinds of ways, running sort of photography workshops around that can be quite tricky, in terms of, it's quite challenging in terms of putting photography workshops in the diary at a long distance, because the acting work can and does bring up kind of short-term changes. And on this particular occasion, I was very lucky, and very in that Light and Land were very understanding, and I was able to move, and the clients were very understanding, and I was able to move the workshop by a few weeks into a place where I could do it. But yeah, it's, as ever with these things, it's a balance, isn't it? It's a juggle,
Yeah.
and you're trying to juggle all of those things at the same time. I guess the thing for me is that it's worth doing, because what I have learned from acting does translate into photography, and it's useful that I am an actor as a photography teacher, because it does bring quite an unusual and unique perspective into the photographic process. So I'm aware that whilst it can be a challenge logistically sometimes in terms of where I'm likely to be, what it does enable me to do is bring something else to the party, in terms of another creative art with another set of ideas that translate across into photography in quite an unusual way. And so that's useful, I think, too.
Yeah, totally. What's the main thing that you've learned about running your own business, in terms of whether it's around the business itself or the photography? What is that you've taken away that you've gone, aha, that's really worth
Oh God, it's just I'm self-employed, really, and so I'm self-employed as an actor, and I'm self-employed as a photographer, and it's just I mean, one of the things I love about it is you never know what's going to happen, so you just don't know. So you're partly in charge of what happens over the course of the year, and we are defined as self-employed people by our choices, but you're not always in charge of the choices that come up. And
Yeah.
so in my line of work, so it's kind of navigating, and it's part of the excitement of it, but it's navigating a way through the unknown. That's kind of what it is. And I love that about it, which is that you never know what is on the horizon in both the acting and the photographic worlds. And that's true in a macro sense of which tours am I going to run and where am I going to run them, and also which acting jobs am I going to do and where am I going to do them, but also in the micro sense of when I turn up at the coast next Sunday morning, what's the weather going to be doing? And how are the conditions going to be? So in that kind of way, I like the unexpectedness. So that is, so I guess it's working with unexpectedness. That's it. So I would say that runs across both photography and acting, and sort of navigating that terrain is part of the joy of it. And so in terms of running it as a business, that's the built-in variable that is always constant.
Yeah, I think for anyone that is running their own business, that's key, is being adaptable and being able to be flexible and go, okay, well, conditions have changed, and whether it's weather conditions, whether it's work conditions, market, whatever it is, something's changed. You have to adapt to it, and you have to roll with the punches and move around or maneuver your business through that space so that you're ending up as successful as you can be. And I mean, I was talking to somebody recently about this. For me, I've actually, because I'm doing some other things in life right now, I'm actually pulling away from a number of things in business, and that's a decision that I've made for my reasons. But I know next year that I'll be restarting some of those things, possibly in a different shape. And so for me personally, I really recognise that ability to change and roll with the punches and make changes and make decisions quickly is absolutely key.
Yeah, it is. And that's, and as a self-employed, that's I totally agree.
Yeah. What about memorable experiences you've had? I'm interested where you talked a bit earlier about the experience being everything. Is there a shoot that you've done where the journey or the experience became more meaningful than the actual final photography?
Gosh. Yeah, that often happens. I do a project on immersive photography, intentional camera movement in the water. And every time I do that, it is what you've just described. So you never know what you got. I've got waterproof housing and I put a camera in it and I do intentional camera movement amongst the waves. And it came from a fascination with both surfing, which I've done for 30 years, and intentional camera movement, which I've done since 2012. And putting those two ideas together, because I hadn't seen it done before, and which doesn't mean it hasn't been done before, incidentally. And but I hadn't seen.
I'm the same with the drone movement. I know other people have done it before. I'm quite sure.
Yeah, exactly. And you just, but you have an idea, and then you see if it works. And what I love about this as a project is how it feels. And so, and it's always constantly surprising. But there is a feeding. One of the things that has always slightly frustrated me about photography is I'm physical as a human. It's one of the reasons why I'm an actor. And much as I love being outside, and I do with a tripod amongst Mother Nature, and I love it. I love the movement of ICM. I love that sense of movement with a subject, making something with a subject, with all of yourself.
Yeah.
And so including your body as well as your mind and your heart. And so for me, one of the things that I've loved about ICM in the water, so my immersive project, is I get to use literally everything I have. And that is a really beautiful feeling. And so regardless of whatever the pictures that I make, I'll be out there for an hour and a half, 2 hours maybe. It's just the making. That's what I love about that project, the sense of total freedom and also the physical challenge of it. Because sometimes I would never knowingly put myself in a dangerous position. And I'm, as previously discussed, I'm sort of very big on reading charts and looking at tides and also weather forecasts and swell forecasts and all of these kinds of things. And I always try and check out the rips on any given beach. I only do this on beaches that I know well, or if I don't know well, I ask someone about it before I go in.
Sure.
But that sense of freedom, of being in the water, swimming in with the waves, bobbing around in the lineup, that kind of a thing, that gives me total pleasure over and above any photographs that I may or may not come away with. It's a bit like surfing, actually, sitting in the lineup. The sitting in a lineup is part of it and is part of the joy. Do you know what I mean? Any waves that you catch will be a bonus,
Yeah.
but sitting in the lineup is part of the joy. And I have a similar thing
Yeah.
with the immersive project, is just the making and the joy of of creation, regardless of what it is that ends up on the back of your camera.
Yeah. Right. What about when things don't go quite right? Yeah. Any horror stories? Everything?
There's been
Because
plenty of that.
everyone has problems when they're out at some point.
Yeah,
Some
well,
worse than others.
I've broken three cameras
Oh, okay.
going.
I've
Yeah,
had the insides of one of my cameras, my old Canon 6D Mark II, changed the insides of that 3 times.
yeah. It's just
Salt
gonna
water.
happen. How did it happen to you?
Just standing in the wrong place sometimes. Once it was a camera that where the tripod wasn't quite as secure on the ground as I thought it was going to be, and it went over. I lost the lens then, but as well as the inside of the cameras. It's usually a wave hitting somewhere that I wasn't watching closely enough when I went and stood there, and it's hit the camera, and yeah, the inside's got a bit wet, and the bag of rice just hasn't worked. Yeah,
No, that's it. The bag of rice in the airing cupboard.
yeah,
Yeah, hasn't quite worked. Yeah, yeah. I've had plenty of that. Yeah, it sort of fails waterproof housing.
mm.
Has been the bane of my life, unfortunately, and I've lost quite a lot of quite expensive equipment doing that. But it's worth it.
Yeah,
It's worth it because of what you get when it works.
yeah.
And what I've learned is to suck that up and use progressively cheaper cameras to replace. Is how I've solved that problem. And as well as upping my game a bit in terms of the waterproof housing. So,
Yeah.
but yes, I've had a fair amount of that, and just I think it goes with the territories where exactly as you say, tripods falling over, stuff going. If you're around water,
Oh, yeah.
it
Seascaping, if you're not getting wet, you're not doing it right.
I really agree with that, actually. And one of the things, this is quite interesting, actually, as a subject, because you've got to be safe. It's really important that you are
Oh,
safe. But when I run workshops, I'm often trying to get them closer to the water
mm,
because that's where the magic happens. And the more distance you have, for me, it's philosophical as well as practical.
yeah,
The closer you are to the water, the more you can get the water trails going directly underneath you, and you have proximity to your subject. But for
absolutely.
me, it's also about connection to your subject.
Totally. The feeling of that water, the pull of it, the sand going
This,
out between your toes, all that sort of thing. That's all part of it.
exactly this. And that's the hardest thing I have actually with groups is getting them closer to the water. And because that's when the magic does happen. So yeah, but also by the same token, that's where the risks are, and
Mm.
particularly to your gear, and that's where the tripods get knocked over. That's where the waterproof housing fails.
Yeah.
All of these kinds of things. But it's also where the joy is because it's that proximity. It's yeah. I can't remember. There's a very famous photographer, isn't it? If you're not getting the right picture, you're not close enough.
That's it.
It's that kind of a thing, isn't it? So
Yeah.
yeah,
There,
no,
there is a too close. I found it a few times.
there is a too close, and it's about knowing where that is, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah. And you mentioned that listening and response and that observation period. It's one of the first things that I do a lot more of now, and it's through losing 3 lots of the same camera insides that has done it. I spend a lot more time standing in the dry before I go
and
somewhere
looking.
that looks a bit wet, before I go, okay, yes, I've got a feeling the tide's receding. So I know that these waves aren't, unless they're a rogue, which are rare, but
Yeah,
they're not going to come up, they're not going to bite me, so I'm okay. Okay, the tide's coming in, so I know I'm going to have a limited time in that space, and then I'm going to have to get out of there. So you've got to listen to what's going on in nature, as you said, and understand that, okay, if I stand there, I'm going to get wet, and my gear's very likely to as well.
yeah, that's right. It's listening to Mother Nature, isn't it? And knowing that Mother Nature is all powerful, and
Absolutely.
she's far more powerful than you. And is that, isn't it? And respecting that. And yeah, I will do a similar thing. Yeah, exactly what you said, Grant. Whenever I get anywhere, just stand and watch. for a good 10, 15 minutes,
Ab-
just to get a sense of the rhythm of what is going on. And like you say, pushing or dropping tide. And if there are rogue waves, in particular, because we've had a lot of stormy weather
Yeah.
over the last couple of months here in the UK. And when we were down in Cornwall a couple of weeks ago, there were rogue waves, and you often get rogue waves from storm-driven water, where it's amplification, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where all of a sudden, yeah, and you get some 2 or 3 waves that you can't see have amplified each other and will come 20 yards further up the beach. So you do have to be careful of that stuff, particularly in storm water, isn't it? That's what I look for.
Totally. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about when you get back into the studio. What kind of efforts are you putting into your edits? Are you spending, first off, I'll ask what I normally ask. Are you straight into editing? Is it the excitement and the feeling that you've captured in the camera? Are you straight into the editing suite when you get back? Or do you let things marinate for a while before you start combing through and saying, okay, well, that's a keeper. I'm going to work on that one, but I'll leave that for another week. What's your practice?
Yeah, both of those. So literally both. So I'll have a look. The first thing I'll do is have a look, and I'll have a look very quickly. So I'll have a quick scoot through, because you know what it's like when you're out taking pictures. There'll be one or two at the time where you go, "Oh, I like that."
Yeah, you see the back of the camera and you go, yeah, I want that.
I want to see
works.
that. Yeah. So I'll do one very, very quick scoot, even if it's 20 minutes. I'll do a 20-minute scoot through, and then maybe in a day or two's time, I'll do another 20-minute scoot through, and then I'll put them away probably for a month or two,
Okay.
and then have a look. And then that sort of sense of distance I find useful, because you've often missed something on the first scoot, or I do. I often miss something because I'm so excited about the ones that you kind of are so excited to see, that you often forget about the other ones that you took along the way, which are often, when you're a bit removed from it, every bit as exciting as the ones you were excited about at the time.
Yep.
So I'll often give it a couple of months and then have a proper look through, and then I still won't do anything. I don't really. Funnily enough, I've brought with me on tour on my hard drive a whole load of stuff from Northumberland that I haven't edited for 5 years.
Yeah.
And I'm going through 5 years worth of work where I've done what I've talked about, but I've never actually done the final edit, where I've kept getting excited by what I'm seeing, but other stuff has come up and I never. So what I've brought with me is literally 5 years of work, which I'm going through it for properly for the very first time and making choices.
Yeah.
And I haven't done that on any of this stuff at all. I've done very rough edits on things. But yeah, so I'm a bit of both. I'll have a very quick look, but then I'll I'll wait for it to settle, just because you often miss something. And then also, what is interesting to me, going back to some of this, which I haven't seen for a long time, is your taste changes. And so
Totally.
do you know what I mean? So stuff that you didn't particularly like 3 or 4 years ago, you're all over.
Yeah,
now.
you come back and
kind of
go, oh, there's a gem I missed. You know?
Yes. So I'm a bit of a hoarder in that way. I keep everything, because you're never quite sure if your taste is going to change, and you were there and you took it. And so I tend not, and so unless something is pretty much technically disastrous, I will pretty much keep everything.
Yeah.
And go back and have a look, sort of years, just to see if there's anything I've missed.
Yeah.
Because you often have a kind of sense that a shoot was really interesting, or this was a really, and back to what we were talking about earlier, the feeling. You just have a sense of the feeling of that night in this place. And I will often keep literally everything from those nights, because there are always something, there's often something in there that you kind of go, there's a bit that kind of stays with you, and from that evening, and even little details that you overlooked at the time, you can go back to it and kind of go, that's a beautiful shot. Yeah. So it's those kinds of things. So yeah, bit of both.
Yeah. You might recognize something when I ask you this question in both of your careers, and I'm interested in both, but mainly the photography one. What do you do when you're struggling to find inspiration?
Do it.
how do you break out of that? This just I don't feel like doing it, or I don't want to do that. I'm sick of doing this. I've done this for 3 years now, and I've done it to death. How do you refresh things?
Well, what I was going to say was do it anyway.
Okay.
Do it anyway. And there's that Hemingway. I work with a brilliant artist in Cornwall called Glyn Macy, who's a wonderful landscape artist and seascape artist, and works with collage. He also does beautiful paintings of trees, and he talks about writing for the wastebasket, which is a Hemingway quote. That whole thing about just those days when nothing appears to be happening, do it anyway. Find a starting point, but do start. And so I will often do that, just do it anyway, go anyway, and see what occurs. The other thing that I might do is just wander around and see what I bump into. Because as previously discussed, I do think photography, a lot of it is about noticing and allow. I talk about trying to stay on receive, trying to stay open for as long as possible. And we'll do that in the rehearsal room. The temptation in the rehearsal room in the acting world is to find something and then lock it down because you're trying to get safe for your first performance. But the braver thing to do in the rehearsal room is to stay open for longer and only shut it down towards the end, because that way you maximize your exploration time. And so for me, and actually one of the interesting things about the pandemic was that I ended up taking pictures in places that I'd never taken pictures before, because they would be places that I would generally overlook, like our local park and our garden. And by forcing myself, well, I wasn't forced, the government did it for me, but with good reason, incidentally, to take pictures, and only for an hour in our local park, you kind of go, well, what is there here? And so those kinds of things are quite useful sometimes, to get yourself to either a place that you wouldn't usually go. I run an exercise once I do online courses, and I think I set a challenge of go somewhere you've never been and take a picture you've never taken. And that's a useful thing to do, to go somewhere you've never been. And even if it's 200 yards away, and there will be places 200 yards away from you that you've never been, or you've never spent time with a camera. And so it just mix it up a bit. So if in doubt, mix it up. And one of the reasons why I do ICM, and I do a lot of multiple exposures, and I do all of those in camera too, is it gives me a starting point if nothing else is happening with my camera. And we all have those days, and so it just gives me a separate way in, another way in, where I start literally with multiple exposures colliding stuff together, just to see if you're going to get something unexpected. And so I often use multiple exposures and ICM almost as a way of resetting my brain, just to get something that I'm not expecting. And that often gives you another avenue of exploration. But mixing it up is useful. Doing something I've never done before, that's useful. Taking out a lens I've never taken before, that's useful. Or going out with something, either to somewhere or with something I don't usually take. All of those things, just mix it up a bit, but do go.
Yeah.
Do go. That would be my thought. Always go.
Brilliant. I think that's fantastic advice. Speaking of advice, what's the best and or worst piece of advice anyone's ever given you?
I don't know. I tell you what I do. There's a brilliant photographer here in the UK, Paul Sanders. He works a lot in black and white. Moved to Cornwall recently, and he talks a lot, and I talk a lot too, about taking photographs for yourself. And I think that is really important. There is only one person who is important in photography, and that is you. And honor your own taste. And it's tempting in the social media world to take photographs, or as a professional photographer, to take photographs for acclaim and for sales and for likes. And you can do that. And for some people, there will be a financial imperative to do that. But if you're taking photographs for art or for your own enjoyment, I would really recommend taking photographs for you. And it's back to a number of things we've touched on during our chat, really, which is it's about your own taste and honoring and developing your own taste, because wherever you've got your ideas from, they all go through you and through your own filter, and you will be adding something to them by it coming through you.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really useful. So by all means, borrow ideas or take inspiration from wherever you should wish, but make sure it goes through you. And I remember I got a really good note once from an acting teacher at my drama school, which was about doing Shakespeare. And he said, make sure the words in between your brain and your and coming out of your mouth, make sure they go via your heart. And I think that's really useful. And I think that's similar in photography, is just make sure you are involved in the photographs that you make. Doug Chinnery talks a lot about a tingle that you get on the back of your neck when you've got something that really pleases you. Pay attention to that kind of stuff, the stuff that really pleases you, and go after it and honor it. That would be so. To make sure you are in your photographs would be my advice.
Lovely. I love that advice. Thanks very much. We're going to have to wrap up shortly, so I've only got a couple more questions for you. First off, can you name a couple of photographers that I need to talk to on the podcast, some landscape people that you think are really worth having a chat to?
Oh gosh, well, I guess I've just mentioned one of them, Paul Sanders,
Sure.
Who's just, I love his work. He's very quiet and contemplative and very beautiful. And I just love his sensibility. I love how he talks about photography and how he thinks and how he feels about photography. And he's also just written a book, actually, which is out there at the moment. So he would definitely be one. I'm just trying to think, sort of out there at the moment. I'm gonna stick with that.
Okay, that'll do.
I'm gonna stick there for now. I really love his work, and yeah, it's just very it's just very quietly very powerful. I do have a thing about sort of quiet photography. I think that's quite interesting as a thought, and it's a difficult thing to do in the world of social media. Do you know what I mean? But I do think ultimately it's the most rewarding. Certainly personally, I post quite a lot of quiet photographs, not always, but often sort of things that please me. And you kind of go, and it's that kind of a thing that those are the ones that feed your soul, really. Yeah. So, yeah.
All right, brilliant. My last question's quite a divisive issue, not just in the photography world. I'm quite sure it's a bit of a divisive issue in the acting world as well. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Gets in the way of the ham, it's been. So yeah, I have partaken of a Hawaiian pizza every now and again, and I've generally wished I'd had more ham and less pineapple.
Fair enough. I don't disagree with that. All right. Well,
very good.
Thank you, Bill. It's been absolutely wonderful chatting with you. I've learned a hell of a lot, and I hope my listeners have. Where can people find your work?
On Instagram at Bill Ward Photography, on the World Wide Web at www.billwardphotography.co.uk. I'm on Facebook as well as at Bill Ward Photography. And I suppose it would be rude of me not to mention the book that I have out there at the moment, which is on my Immersive project, so my ocean-based ICM Immersive project, which is currently published by Cozy Books. And you'll find them at www.cozy.com, I think, or it might be cozybooks.com. I should know that, but there we are. But yes, and you'll find that under sort of recent titles, I think. So yeah, and they ship worldwide.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Bill. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate.
You too, Grant. Really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, wishing you all the best, both with the podcast, but also your own photography. Fantastic. And love ICM from a drone. Love that. What a great idea that is.
Thanks very much. Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnphotography.com. I'm also on all of the socials that you can find out there, except Twitter/X. I don't do that anymore. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe because it really helps to get the podcast get seen and heard. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.